This is a different perspective today, isn't it? The beautiful fire softly glowing in the fireplace. The Christmas tree in the background spinning around with all the brightly colored lights. If you look carefully, you can see me as well. I'm in the reflection of the glass. It's a very cozy scene. It's very authentic, but there are a few things that you don't know, which, may cause you to change your mind about what you are actually seeing. The first thing is that this is not a real fireplace. This is actually a propane stove, and those logs that look so convincing are actually not real logs. They're not made out of wood. They're made out of ceramic. And so all the embers that you see glowing, it's not wood, it's not real ash, it's just pieces of ceramic. The tree in the background, which of course you can't see up close, but I'm sad to say it's not a real tree. It's an artificial tree. Interestingly enough, I've always wanted a real tree. It's been a long time since I've had a real tree, but I've always wanted one. I think real trees are just beautiful. I've also always wanted a real fireplace. Not a fake fire. I want a real one that actually burns wood. And I've wanted that for a long time. And I was just thinking about that today as I was sitting in front of the fire. And, like what prevents us from having these real things in our lives? I desire a real tree. I desire a real fireplace. And I was thinking on a deeper level about what prevents us from having real relationships in our lives. It's something that we desire. We don't desire the fake friendships, the fake relationships. We want authentic, true, real, meaningful interactions with others. And I think that even though we desire it, it's definitely a challenge for us. And I think that there are several reasons for this. I know the first one, I think we would all agree upon. It's definitely hard finding the kind of people that you can have a meaningful relationship with. There are so many people out there in this world that we can have fake relationships with, but of course that's not real, and we know they're not ultimately satisfying. So when we're on the hunt for, a real relationship, it's very difficult to find people who will be able to give us what we are longing for in our lives. But I think that we need to rely more on our intuition and trust more in our intuition. And I think that when we start trusting our intuition, I think that's when we can find those people who we can have a real relationship or friendship with. And once we find those people, and that's kind of really what I want to talk about today, but once we find those people, that's when we have to show them who we are. If we want those real relationships in our lives, that's when we have to open up and start to reveal part of ourselves. And I think that's difficult for so many of us because we are such private individuals. And it makes it very difficult to let someone else look at us in such a way. And I think a lot of the problem is our perfectionistic tendencies. I know we talk about perfectionism and how it prevents us from accomplishing the things that we want to accomplish in our lives, but I also think that it prevents us from having real relationships. I think there's a part of us that wants to be perfectionistic in our relationships in the sense that we do not want to appear anything less than perfect with that loved one. And I think we want them to have a certain way of observing us, or we want them to have a certain way of seeing us where they don't see the flaws, that we want them to see this perfect version of ourselves. And that's not realistic, and because we aren't perfect individuals. No one is. And I think that a lot of times that's why in relationships we get to a certain point where we know we have to truly open up And we know that to do that, we have to show those unsavory sides of ourselves that aren't so pretty. And I think a lot of times that's when we want to cut and run, because it's very difficult, because we want to put ourselves out there as this perfectionistic ideal, which is just unrealistic. And it also keeps us from having those beautiful, real relationships. So I think it's difficult for us, but if you want the real relationship, you have to open up, and you have to be willing to be who you are, to let the other person see who you are. You know, that's one piece of advice. I mean, I struggle a lot of times with generic advice that I hear, just tossed around out there. It doesn't always apply to me. But that's one piece of advice that I do believe applies to all of us, no matter who we are, and that's to be yourself. And I think that as INFJ personality types, we probably struggle with that the most. We don't want to be ourselves because we are private individuals, and we are sensitive, and we are secretive. And it's very difficult for us to truly be ourselves in a relationship. And I think that's why we struggle. And I think that's why we're lonely. And I think that's why we have trouble finding people to be in relationships with. It's just because we are private. But when you found that person or those people that you can trust, your intuition is telling you that you can trust, you need to let go of that perfectionism. And you need to show that person who you are. And I think when you're able to do that, then you're going to have those real and beautiful relationships in your lives. And I think that's when you can have the deep relationships. And those, as we all know, are the most meaningful and beautiful relationships.